a drowning child, and a rescue that turned into something far more powerful than he ever bargained for. He thought he was just saving a life, but one dive into the river unraveled a secret bigger than anything he'd ever imagined. What happened next stunned everyone. He lived in a place where the walls were thin, but the silence was thick. A one-bedroom apartment with a door that groaned louder than he ever could. On paper, he was just another name on a long list of forgotten men. Single, broke, overworked. But if you looked closer, if you listened hard enough, you'd hear the quiet war he fought every single day. His name was Elias. No title, no prestige, just Elias. He carried himself with the kind of stillness that comes from being tired for too long. The kind of tired that doesn't come from sleep, but from life. Each morning began the same. 4:30. No alarm clock. He didn't own one. His body knew the pain by heart. He'd rise, careful not to wake the tiny figure sleeping beside him, curled in the only blanket warm enough to make up for everything they lacked. That was his daughter, his world, the only piece of joy the universe had left behind after it took everything else. 3 jobs. None of them paid enough, but he worked them like they did. Day shift hauling crates in a warehouse with no heat. Evening shift washing dishes for a restaurant where laughter echoed from tables he could never afford. Night shift as a janitor in an office building too pristine for men like him to be seen during daylight. And yet, every shift, every aching joint, every hour spent beneath fluorescent lights, it was all for her. Lena, 7 years old. Big brown eyes, full of questions he never had the answers to, and a smile that made the weight on his shoulders feel a little less sharp. She didn't know how broke they were. He never let her see the red notices piling up. Never let her hear the conversations through the thin door about rent, or how many days they had left before the locks changed. Because in front of her, he was magic. He could make one dinner stretch for 3 nights and still convince her it was something new. He could turn busted light bulbs into twinkling fairy tales. And when she'd ask about Mommy, he'd smile like it didn't kill him to say she's in the stars, even though the truth was much darker. His wife had died 3 winters ago. Sudden, unforgiving. One moment they were a family. The next, he was learning how to fold a tiny dress with shaking hands and tell a child why the sky had taken someone it never planned to give back. But he never broke. He couldn't afford to. The world didn't offer grace to men like him. Men who held on by their fingernails and smiled through unpaid electricity bills. He had no help, no safety net. Just a daughter with bedtime stories, a past that haunted him in silence, and a future he was trying to build with scraps. His world was clouded with pain, struggle. There was no sign of hope that things would work out for him and his daughter, but he had no idea what fate had in store for him. It was one of those rare mornings that didn't feel heavy. The sky was calm, brushed in soft hues of gray and gold, like it couldn't quite decide whether to rain or shine. The air held the kind of quiet that made time feel slower, almost gentle. And for Elias, it was a borrowed moment, a sliver of peace carved out of life that seldom allowed for any. He had promised Lena a day at the river, and despite how tired his body was, he meant to keep it. No work calls. No scraping for shifts, just a father and his little girl, with peanut butter sandwiches wrapped in foil and a secondhand blanket that smelled faintly of detergent and dust. They settled on a grassy patch near the water's edge, not far from where the current picked up, but far enough to feel safe. Lena skipped stones, her laughter echoing like wind chimes through the trees. Elias leaned back on his elbows, watching her with quiet awe. She was sunshine bottled in a body far too small to hold so much light. For a brief, while the world felt still, like it was finally giving him permission to breathe. Then it shattered. A scream cut through the air, sharp, high, desperate. It wasn't the scream of a child at play. It was deeper, primal, the kind of scream that peeled away peace and replaced it with raw panic. Elias snapped upright. At first, he didn't see anything. Just water, wind, the flutter of birds fleeing the trees. Then another scream, this one choked, frantic, and his eyes locked on movement downstream. Something, no, someone was thrashing against the current. A child, small arms flailing, a head barely breaching the water before slipping under. There was no adult nearby, no one running, no one calling the child's name. He didn't think. He just ran. His boots dug into the soft earth, kicking up tufts of grass and mud as he bolted. Lena's voice echoed behind him, "Daddy." But he couldn't stop. Every instinct in his body screamed go. The river was colder than he expected. It punched the breath from his lungs as he dove in, his arms slicing through the current. The water pulled at him like it had a will of its own, angry, fast, unyielding. But Elias had been dragged by life before, and he didn't come this far to watch a child vanish in front of him. He reached her just as her head slipped under again. His hand closed around a wrist, so small it felt like glass. For one terrifying second, he wasn't sure he had her. The current yanked them both sideways, spinning. But he anchored his feet, found the riverbed with his toes, and hoisted her into his arms. She coughed, sputtered, latched onto him with all the force of someone who knew this moment would decide everything. He carried her back to shore, staggering, half submerged, lungs burning. The weight of her tiny frame pressed against him, limp but breathing. When they finally collapsed on the grass, she didn't cry. She didn't scream. She just clung to him in stunned silence, trembling like a bird that had flown too close to fire. Her face was pale, soaked hair clinging to her cheeks like threads of shadow. Her lips quivered, but no sound came, not even a name. Elias wrapped the blanket around her, rubbing her arms gently, trying to coax warmth back into her limbs. He looked around, expecting anyone to come running. But there was no one, no frantic mother, no voices calling from the woods. Just him, his daughter, watching wide-eyed from a few feet away, and this silent, soaking child who stared up at him with eyes that carried too much fear for her age. And in that moment, Elias felt something strange. Not heroism, not pride, something colder. A question, quiet but piercing, like wine through broken glass. Why was she alone? But before the question could take form, before he could process the full weight of what had just happened, tires crunched on gravel behind them. Someone of a higher status had arrived. Who could it be? The hush that followed was eerie. Nature itself seemed to be holding its breath. The girl was still in Elias's arms, her tiny frame wrapped in that damp, thrift store blanket, pressed against him like he was the only thing tethering her to safety. Her breathing was shallow, eyes wide, glassy with fear, but alive. That alone was a miracle. And then the sound. It came like thunder out of nowhere, tires grinding gravel, fast, loud, commanding. A black SUV tore into the clearing with a kind of urgency that didn't belong here. Not near this quiet river. Not in this forgotten corner of town where the world rarely visited, let alone cared. The brakes shrieked. The door flew open, and out stepped a woman who did not fit the setting. She didn't walk. She arrived. Every inch of her radiated command. Elegance woven with iron. Her clothes, sleek and dark, screamed influence. Her posture didn't bow, not to anyone. And when her eyes found the girl in Elias's arms, the change in her was instant. The confidence cracked, just for a second, but it was enough to reveal the tremor beneath her polished surface. Her pace broke into a run. The girl didn't move, didn't speak. She clung harder to Elias, her grip like a whisper of desperation. Two men spilled out of the SUV behind the woman. Suits, sunglasses, the kind of men trained to enter a room first and ask questions later. But this time they didn't lead, they followed. The woman had already crossed the distance. She stopped just short of him, not out of fear, but restraint. Her lips parted, but no sound came. Her hands trembled slightly as she reached toward the child. But the girl recoiled just a little, like instinct pulled her deeper into Elias's chest. She didn't cry. She didn't look at the woman. She just hid. Elias looked between them, trying to make sense of what was unfolding in front of him. He didn't know this woman. Her designer clothes, her sleek car, the stone-set determination in her eyes. None of it belonged in his world. But grief, fear, relief, those emotions lived in hers now. Her expression was a storm, and her composure was losing its battle against the wind. Still holding the girl, Elias stepped slightly forward. He didn't know her name, didn't know where she'd come from, or why the girl had been alone. But the way this woman looked at the child, it was as if something vital had been returned to her. Slowly, carefully, he extended the girl into the woman's arms. She accepted her like she was receiving her own soul back. But the child didn't let go. Her small hands dug into Elias's coat, clinging with a strength born from raw fear. And even as she was pulled gently into the embrace of the woman, her eyes never left him. Not once. She didn't speak, didn't cry, but her silence was deafening. The woman held her tightly, arms trembling with gratitude and disbelief. But there was confusion too. Something hidden in the tight line of her jaw, in the flicker of questions behind her guarded eyes. And Elias, he simply stepped back, unsure of where his role ended in whatever this was. Still soaked from the river, chest heaving, heart pounding, he watched as the little girl, who had nearly been lost to the current, now lay safe in the arms of someone who clearly mattered to someone who seemed to command the very air around her. But that didn't explain everything. Not the convoy, not the silence, not the way the two bodyguards stood alert like shadows with ears. Elias didn't know who she was. He didn't yet realize what storm he had stepped into. She stood in the fading light by the river's edge, the little girl, her daughter, wrapped in her arms, clinging like a lifeline. The moment had stilled around them, but something far larger than gratitude pulsed in the space between her and the man who had saved her child. It was as if two worlds had accidentally collided, his, worn and weathered by hardship, and hers, cloaked in power and privilege most people could only imagine. Her eyes had softened, but not entirely. There was still calculation behind them, an instinct, perhaps, born of a life spent surrounded by people who wanted something, people who smiled while hiding sharp intentions. But this man, Elias, he wasn't like them. She could feel it, that same gut feeling she had trusted to build her empire. And yes, that's exactly what it was, an empire. Because she didn't just own the house she lived in or the company she ran. She owned districts, blocks, high-rises, and headlines. Her name held weight in boardrooms and ballots. Her silence could shape markets, and her endorsement could tip elections. She moved with the force of legacy and influence. But all of it meant nothing in that moment, because she had almost lost the only thing she couldn't replace. Her daughter, her voice, usually steady and commanding, cracked when she finally looked at Elias and whispered, "Who are you?" There was no accusation in her tone, only disbelief. Disbelief that someone who had nothing would give everything without expecting something in return. Elias, still catching his breath, offered the only truth he had, a father. She blinked, as if startled by the simplicity of it. She offered money, help, a reward, anything. But he shook his head before she even finished. "I didn't do it for anything," he said quietly, and he meant it. But when she left, still holding her daughter, still shaken, she didn't leave the matter behind. Later that night, tucked away in her glass-walled penthouse, with city lights flickering like stars at her feet, she began searching. Not through databases or assistants. She searched for him, Elias, a man with no online footprint, no polished resume, no PR trail to follow. What she found instead was a life quietly lived in struggle. A rundown apartment, a series of part-time jobs, a little girl of his own, bright and kind, but wearing shoes 2 sizes too small. A man doing everything right, but still slipping through the cracks. It stayed with her. It gnawed at her. So she did something she hadn't done in years. She showed up unannounced. No security detail. No black SUV this time. Just her and a woman with a clipboard, her assistant, standing at Elias's front door, where peeling paint and weary walls said more than any file ever could. She offered him a job. Not charity, dignity. A real position based on the integrity she saw at the river. She offered him a place to live, a real home with space for his daughter to run free. And she offered tuition, so his little girl could dream beyond survival. Elias didn't speak at first. His throat tightened. His pride wrestled with his gratitude. Then, finally, he admitted what so many never could. I needed the help. I just didn't want it to seem like I expected it, because I rescued your daughter. She smiled, a rare, genuine smile. And for the first time in a long while, both of them stood not as rescuer and rescued, but as two parents who had found something priceless in each other's story. If this story touched your heart, like, share, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell for more powerful, soul-touching stories that restore faith in humanity.